talk a little bit about what it means to have Mercury in Critica. Krittika Nakshatra is representative of something very harsh. It can be very sharp, like scissors, and I imagine a sword with a perfectly sharp blade on both sides. And if you think about what a sword represents, you can think about the history that comes along with the traditions that used these things, right? How long it would take you to learn how to master the art of something that is so sharp, right? So having any planet in this sign or in this constellation is going to require you to be supremely aware of the power that you have. And specifically, we're going to talk about Mercury here. So Mercury is the way that you communicate with the world, and if you look in your chart, you will be able to understand better the reasons why, like for instance, the reason why I hesitate as I speak, the reason why my speech is a little bit slower and like more methodical. That is why that is related to a number of planets, but mostly to my Mercury. So having Mercury in Critica is a potentially dangerous placement, just as anyone handling a sword or a knife without instruction or without any sort of experience, you know, you have to be experienced in order to know how to handle this. It's an art form, essentially. So the things that let's talk about the strengths of having Mercury in Critica, okay? So you will be able to generally you'll be able to convince people of anything. You are a master at speaking, and depending on your mood, you will be able to come off as a fairly reasonable and intellectual person. The way that you communicate is analytical and it's sharp. So it's direct, it's specific, and again, that can be, you know, depending on the house and the rulership of that house, there will be different factors, but overall, it's important to recognize that this is something that you are supposed to learn, right? So you might not be an expert at communication yet, but eventually you will be able to handle your words as if they are a sharp object, right? And so think about the precision that comes with anything that you do with something sharp. Think about the actual function of that. So, you know, I'm imagining someone carving wood, right? So this could be helpful for someone who has to use words in a way that cut things out. And you know, a lot of times people say it's this is a placement that represents someone who's an editor. You can be an editor of words, you could be a videographer, you could be a filmmaker, anything that cuts information up. This is a representation of you if you have this placement. Let's say that there are problems that may come about because of this. Now, let's pull a card because they're right in front of me. So when it comes to resourcefulness, you're going to have a very good understanding of how it is that you can write your way into anything. Let's say that. You were probably someone who scored very high on maybe not reading, like maybe not comprehension, but on written form. You're probably a writer of some sort, and if you're not, you're capable of being one. You could also be a linguist, or an aspiring linguist. Don't assume that just because you don't speak multiple languages that you couldn't. The likelihood is high that you could. The probability is high, especially since you being able to take in material, to take in, like, you're analytical about the way that words come to you. So for example, if you were reading something, you would be very critical of what was being said. This may even, in regards to like relationships, in communication style, you might speak to people as if it's almost like you're trying to find what is hidden or what is wrong in what they're saying. Like, you are a natural critic. So when people talk to you, you're going to be reading in between the lines. You're going to be thinking about why it is they're saying this word instead of this word. You're going to be thinking about the tone of voice, the inflection. And because of that, it almost makes you it almost makes you too critical because you're too aware. But this is, every placement is representative of a path that you are meant to walk, right? So this is not something you come into this life understanding. It's something that hopefully you leave this life with a better understanding of. So, you at 15 with this placement may not be fully developed. Say you're going through a time where that aspect is highlighted in your chart. This might cause some sort of friction in the way that you communicate, and it can be in every aspect of your life. Some recommendations on how to artfully move through having such a harsh but helpful placement. Writing. It's really important that if you have this placement, you need to write, even if it's not for anyone else. This is directly related to who you are. So it'll bring peace. I'm hearing peace. It'll bring peace to you because you're constantly scrutinizing everything, and your language is sharp. The way that you think about words are sharp. So that means your mind is sharp in some way. So it's almost like you want to filter out whatever's happening in your life, so that it's like sharpening a blade, right? So if Mercury, if Critica represents something that's sharp, like a sharp blade, then you want to continue to sharpen that blade, right? So communicating, and communicating to yourself, because this is about self-study. At the end of the day, it's about self-study. It doesn't really involve anyone else. Now, say your Mercury in Critica is in your 7th house, then that would be directly related to the way that you communicate with partners, right? With other people. So that might be a little bit different, but still overall, without being specific, learn how to use words and consume words, and maybe even add just a little bit of other languages to your life, because even if you're not fluent in that, it's something that will help you. It will help temper the intensity that this placement brings about. So let me think of other things that I want to say that are related to this, and then I'll just edit this video. So let's describe the way that you might present in a workplace. So you will probably be the person that handles, if you're in an office, you're going to be the person who is like handling the consumption and the distribution of information. Because you have Mercury in Critica, because you have this analysis to you, you're going to be the one that's passing the papers in between like this person and this person. So you might be a good project manager. You might be a good, even like account manager. You might be a liaison, a supervisor. If you're in an office, it doesn't really matter what setting it is. In any role that requires you to look at details and then transcribe those details to someone else. So let's look at things that are sharp and things that cut, or places that there is cutting. So you might work in like an orthopedic office. You might work with surgeons. You might work in anything that's weapons related. You can work even with like sharp objects and tools, maybe in like some sort of warehouse, some sort of building, like managing. And it doesn't even have to be management, but in some place where there's a critical need to look at something. And this is where you're going to learn, you're going to understand more about what it is that you're looking at, like if you know what house this is in. So if your Mercury in Critica is in your 6th house, you know, your 6th, this is an easy one to understand. Your 6th house represents the body. So any place where you have to communicate specific details about anatomy or health, that's going to be an area where you will shine. So you could be a teacher of anatomy. You could be a client, like you could be the like a client liaison, like a client rep. A client comes to you, or a patient, and they have a bunch of information about their health history, right? that is the 6th house. That is their health. And they're giving you what it is Mercury, which is this information, these words, and you're going to observe them and scan them, because that is your nakshatra. That is the Krittika aspect of you. And you're going to be able to analyze all of this and then move it wherever it needs to go, right? Say it needs to go to this physician or this provider or whatever. That's going to be something that you're capable of doing. So you could work in healthcare, you could write about healthcare, you could write about anything related to health. And that's only an example of Mercury and Critica being in the 6th house. Let's pretend that it's in the 4th house. If it was in the 4th house, you might work in real estate. The 4th house represents the home, right? So you may look over contracts that are, like, maybe you're a property manager, or maybe you are a lawyer, a real estate lawyer. You have to, regardless of what house this is in, you have to constantly be aware. You're going to benefit from understanding that in order to fulfill, what is the word that I'm looking for? In order to satisfy your Mercury placement, to create a beneficial aspect, you have to provide what Mercury is seeking. And what he's seeking is some sort of introspection and some sort of critique of words, of information. You could work in research, you could be a scientist, you could be a chemist, a mathematician, and even like a graphic designer. Maybe not a graphic designer for the sake of visuals, but for the sake of like publishing, or for creating textbooks or something like that. Let's talk about the challenges of having this placement. The way that you communicate, regardless of where this is also going to be dictated by the rulership of that house. So if that house is ruled by, let's put it into the most difficult position. If you have Mercury in Critica and you have a house that is governed by fire, a fire element, Aries, Leo, what is it? Is it Sagittarius? No. Is it Sagittarius? A fire sign. Okay, if you have a fire sign, I'm thinking of Aries. So if you have an Aries, okay, this is a difficult placement. This is probably the most difficult placement that you could have with this specific combination. So the way that you communicate is going to be very harsh. It's going to be very rash, and it burns like fire. So it's hot, it's intense, it's passionate. You're probably good at persuading people to do things, like I said at the beginning, but this is exceptionally difficult, especially if you are not in a position of power. If you are not in a position of power and you have such a powerful placement, like, this will probably be one of the harshest aspects to have in your chart. And harsh, just because something is intense doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. This is probably something that you'll learn to grow into, but you will either, you're the type of person people will like you or they will hate you. They will either really respect you and listen to what you have to say. Generally, people listen to you when you speak. Generally, people will listen to you when you speak. That doesn't mean that they may like what you have to say. And you could have the personality of almost like a dictator in the way that you're just so rash in your speech. And some bosses may not bring that out in you, but if you're dealing with someone who is also, has aspects that are that intense, that's just probably not going to work. So in this case, regardless of the rulership of the house, to appease a Mercury and Critica person, be sure to take in information. Don't consume content. Consume content, but consume words, consume text. And you can think about it like, okay, if this placement is in an earth aspect, then consume whatever elements are opposite of you. Like, you might want to read about spirituality or nature, or try to find certain categories that are not the placement that you're in. So if I had a fire sign that was my rulership of this specific placement, I would want to read information that was related to nature, that was maybe related to gardening, something that would ground me and oppose the fire. So I'm not going to want to read about the news. I'm not going to want to read the news. I'm not going to want to read anything stressful, anything that's already fiery by nature, anything about the wars, anything about war. Yeah, just military war. None of that is going to help appease this. It's only gonna add heat to an already burning fire, right? So don't do that. Again, let's see, I'm gonna edit this video a lot, so let's see what else we can talk about. I would say, what is some advice for people with Mercury and Critica? It's probably advisable to listen to music. Music is probably really important to you because this is such a strong placement. So listening to music is going to help to temper that intensity, and the type of music you want to listen to is instrumental, maybe even some sort of foreign instrumental music. It's going to temper that intensity, that heat, and it's going to calm the mind. It's going to help you to be less critical, and it's going to slow down the analysis that's always happening with you. Even you can think about, lo-fi beats, any sort of beats, anything that's just long and drawn out and instrumental, that is really good for you. communicating while you're mad is probably not going to work out well. It's probably not going to end very well. Unless, you know, your profession is something that requires that. So if you work in law enforcement, this is probably a great position to have. If you are in a courtroom, this is probably a good position to have. If you're a politician, this is probably a fairly good position to have. Now, will that exacerbate your placement? Yes, probably. But it will also fulfill its nature. Like, that is your nature. So understanding the context of the constellation that any planet falls in will help you understand its nature. That is why there is a myth about each. It denotes the characteristics of that time, right? So let's see the way that let's talk about friendships. If you have this placement, the people that are around you are going to be very accepting of the intensity that you bring. They know that you probably just say whatever it is that you believe. And you might even be someone who says something that not everyone wants to hear. But the people that are around you, this is also a generalization, but they will either be like you, they will appreciate people like you, or they will be completely opposite in that they do not have the courage to say those things, but respect them. And you could lose friends, specifically, you know, if you consider the past few years, there have been such a polarizing landscape when it comes to views about, you know, politics and all these things. So you might be someone who alienates people indirectly, and that's not a bad thing. You're actually just speaking truth. So that's an important thing to bring up. That's an important aspect to bring up. It's almost like when you use a knife, you're trying to get to the heart of something. When you're cutting through a pineapple, you're trying to get to the heart of it. That's what the knife is able to do. So you're able to do that with your words. You would probably be very good at interviewing people and asking people really difficult questions, like an interrogator, or maybe like a talk show host. You would probably be pretty good at having a podcast, like hosting a podcast. And it depends on the nature of that, but people listen to what you have to say, and you, you're the victor. Okay, this is what's coming up. They see you as someone who trusts what they're saying. So you're very confident in the things that you say, and because of that, whether or not people agree with you, they know that they respect you because you're so confident about the way that you speak. It's so direct, it's so bold, right? what else can we say about Mercury and Critica? What's the hardest part about having this placement? The hardest part about having this placement is knowing that you are constantly, it's mostly an authority clash. You will always clash with authority unless you are the authority, or unless the person who is who is your boss or whoever respects the way that you communicate. But you will always have to say what it is that you believe, and there's always going to be some sort of, you're going to be like the outcast in a way, because people can't handle the truth, and this placement is a truth bringer, essentially. You might even be like I'm seeing a filmmaker, and I'm seeing someone who creates documentaries. Like, you're always looking to get to the heart of something. Like, you want to just cut through everything and get to the center of it, you know? It's like you're pruning things. I think that's all that we're gonna say for now, but try to learn how to create harmony with your Mercury placement. Learn to take in information that's beneficial for you, that helps temper your mind. Learn to write more and be more aware of the power that your speech has. Be aware of the intensity that others can, you can reflect an intensity in others that they might not be ready to handle. And that's not a bad thing, but it could be a challenge at certain parts in your life. Okay. Thank you so much.